Good evening and welcome to Slam the Gavel, the show that tells it all regarding family court, other court issues, as well as CPS. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie. There is a non-denominational retreat weekend at the Resolution Center of Jacksonville, Florida. This will be a time of support and renewal for parents and grandparents on the journey of parental alienation, standing strong in resilience, paving the way for good health and a great future. This will take place April 22nd through the 24th at the Resolution Center of Jacksonville, Florida, and I will have all of that in the podcast notes. I have a brand new guest. His name is Mark Ludwig. He has a 35-year background in the political arena in Missouri as a candidate, campaign manager, and advisor. He gained national notoriety as a candidate for United States Congress. He has served on the board of directors for numerous businesses, chamber, and civic organizations in the St. Louis area. He is the founder of Americans for Equal Shared Parenting. He has directly worked on shared parenting legislation in 29 different states, and he has personally met with over 580 legislators across the country regarding shared parenting issues. Now, he's also been interviewed over 230 times to help raise awareness on different TV, radio, and podcast interviews regarding shared parenting. Also, he's been a featured speaker at the annual National Eagle Council event, along with Senator Ted Cruz, Senator Rand Paul, and Congressman Andy Biggs. Now, I welcome him to the show. I'm so glad you're on my podcast, Mark Ludwig. How are you doing today, and how did you get involved in all of this?
Well, thanks for having me. I always appreciate an opportunity to try and help raise awareness. It's a never-ending task for all of us, trying to get the awareness out there with people that have no idea that this problem exists.
Mm-hmm.
But I was like so many people. It wasn't even on my radar screen until my son was born that there was a problem. And that's the problem we face is so many people. I give the analogy, it's like when you buy a new car. The week before you bought the car, you weren't even aware of that type pretty much. And the day after you buy the car, I still will never forget one day when I bought a new car, and the next day driving to work, I saw like 8 of the identical car on the way to work. And I was like, where were all these cars before? But it just gets on your radar screen. And that's what happens to so many of us. That for most of us, we weren't even aware there was a problem. Then we go through a custody situation, and all of a sudden it's everywhere. We find somebody at church, one of our neighbors, somebody we used to work with, 8 friends on Facebook, and we're bombarded. And unfortunately, we end up talking to ourselves usually instead of trying to help raise awareness outside the community.
Mm-hmm.
But for myself, I was unaware. I try to not go through too many details out of respect for my son, just because obviously anything that goes on social media, someday he will watch, and I don't think it's healthy for him to hear me talking bad about his mother. But in the best way I can try and go through the generic of our situation. We weren't married when he was born, and I found out I had no rights as a result. 6 weeks after he was born, his mother moved without telling me, and there was a long period of time where I had no idea where he was and if I would ever see him again for the rest of my life. And just a horrible, horrible feeling that steals all the joy as a new parent. I mean, I love kids. I've always been active and involved with kids in St. Louis. That's one of the ironies of this whole situation is I served on the board of directors for the Angels Arms Foundation for foster kids in St. Louis. I was the first ever chairman of the Litzinger charity auction for special needs kids in St. Louis. And before my son was born, I literally spent about 2 days a week, every week, taking kids horseback riding to the zoo, to Six Flags, jet skiing, and then waiting for the day when I would have a child, only to find out my son's not going to get those experiences with his own dad.
I'm so sorry to hear that.
At the end of, I went 204 days without seeing him. Then a year of a court battle to be relegated to basically a visitor in my own child's life. And that was when I started doing all the research that you're probably even more familiar with than I am of what happens to kids who grow up without one of their parents. And, all the societal statistics of behavioral problems, drug use, incarceration rates, high school dropout rates. And I looked at what happened to his siblings. He has 5 siblings by 2 other fathers. And they all followed that pattern to a T. And I thought, okay, that's not going to happen to my son. And because I was pretty politically active in Missouri and pretty well known in the political arena in Jeff City, I started getting active trying to get legislation passed and started getting calls from people all over the country. And finally, I just feel like my mission in this issue is to try and educate people how they can get legislation passed in their state. I always say I don't want to try and be the guy to pass legislation, because most states don't like an out-of-state person coming in tell them what needs to be done in their state,
Mhm.
but they want to hear their constituents. So I think my role is taking 35 years of a background in the political arena and educating people step by step what they can do in their state to help get legislation passed.
Now, I guess it seems like it would be difficult to get legislation passed. I, you know, sometimes these people just take our paperwork that we've, sent in and just put it off to the side. Do you see that happening a lot?
Yeah, and I think that's where it helps for me to have been around the political arena beforehand to understand why there is the problem. We get frustrated, and I understand everyone's frustration, thinking this is so important. Why is it not happening? But I learned years ago, in anything in life, you have to put yourself in the other person's shoes. In Missouri, for example, the legislative session is only 5 months long. Now, these people are working for a very part-time income. In Missouri, the salary, I think, is $31,000 a year. And for that, they're basically giving up 5 months with their families because they arrive in Jeff City on Sunday night. They don't leave till Thursday night. On weekends, when they're supposed to be having family time, they've got ribbon cuttings and constituents calling them at all hours of the night, chamber meetings, Boy Scout ceremonies. So it's about an 18-hour a day job, 7 days a week for these people. And then while they're doing all that other stuff, in Missouri, there's about 2,000 bill ideas every legislative session. So there's just no way that a person can understand and have time to read 2,000 potential bill ideas and be educated on. And most of them come in with a priority issue, whether it's a pro-life issue or a Second Amendment issue or a finance issue, but there's some reason they ran for office. And normally there's going to be about 10 or 20 bills within their priority. So they're going to spend, hundreds of hours studying those issues.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not that we're not important to them. It's not that they don't care about us. There's just not enough time in the day for them to be sitting through the regular, House or Senate floor agenda. Then they're all assigned to 3 or 4 committee hearings, and they normally have committees during the week. So there's just not enough time on the day to get on their radar screen. And that's one of the biggest keys that I try to educate those within our community about, is that's why we need more people calling legislators. Because the way to get through to a legislator is not to give them more information. To be honest, the more information you give them, the more they're going to run. If you show up with a legislator and you have anything more than 5 pages for them to read, I promise you it will never get read. Not because they don't care, they just don't have time. And if I'm a legislator and I have 3 people who gave me a 1 sheet that's very condensed, clear, concise, and to the point, and somebody who gave me a 5-page or a 10-page article, the 5 or 10 pages is probably going in the trash just because I don't have time to read it. But what gets on legislators' agenda and what really gets on their radar is getting 5 or 10 calls from their own constituents. That lets them realize, okay, I don't know what this issue is yet, but boy, I'm getting a lot of calls about this. And these people seem to be, very intelligent, very articulate. That's the biggest key, is we can't call legislators and threaten. I think that's what most people do, is because there has been an injustice done. And I feel it. It happened to me, so I understand. But a legislator who's never been educated about this issue, and the very first call they get is somebody saying, how dare you? I'm going to vote you out of office. I'm going to do this. Think about when someone attacks you. That's not the person you want to help. If I have 2 people coming up to me, one is yelling at me, the other one smiles, holds their hand out and says, hey, how are you doing today? That's the one I want to start a conversation with. And so it's very important that people become educated. Number 1, make a friend with legislators. And we're not trying to be phony in any way whatsoever. It's just, that's how business is done in all areas of life.
Mm-hmm.
And so we have to build relationships with these legislators. And that's the other reason I tell people, a lot of people think they want to get legislation passed. They think they need to be at their state capitol. The reason I'm so effective in Missouri, I've only been to the Capitol twice this year. And one time the legislators weren't even in session. Where I get legislation passed is I meet legislators outside of the Capitol in their home districts. I go to town hall meetings. I go to chamber events. I go to ribbon cuttings. That's where you build the friendships with them outside. Then you can I'm more powerful now. And I don't say it's to boast about me, but I am a lot more powerful making phone calls to legislators on their cell phone than calling the Jeff City office. And that's, I mean, literally, as we talk, we've got a bill going before the Missouri House sometime, possibly today or tomorrow. And literally, I've been texting the bill sponsor, and I don't have to go to Jeff City to do it. Jim and I have been friends for a long time. That's how you get legislation passed, is building friendships with these legislators and educating them. And unfortunately, what people have done in the past, they've watched movies where people held protests, and not saying protests are bad, but protests do not work with legislators. Protests sometimes will get you media attention, which is needed also. But as far as the legislative component, most legislators don't like protests, because legislators' theory is, if these people are mad about this, they may get mad at me one day and protest me. So I'm going to avoid them totally. I don't even want to be a friend of them, because if they turn on me, they're going to be outside my office protesting next. So they shy away from that kind of thing. And like I said, I'm not saying protests are bad. Protests have their role, but their role is more to earn media attention than it is to get legislators' attention. You don't protest in a Capitol. That's gonna chase people away. And unfortunately, that's what happens, is most people are so upset, they want to protest at the Capitol. That will chase people away. You've got to build friendships and build relationships with the legislators and educate them on the issue.
Mm-hmm. You know, what do you think of people writing up proclamations and having their mayor sign it, either on family court or parental alienation? Because I sent out a couple and I didn't get any responses. I sent out like 4 of them and no one responded.
Yeah, anything to help raise awareness. Those things are great. They may not directly influence legislation, but indirectly it helps get things on people's radar screen. Like a mayor, this issue won't directly affect a mayor because they can't control statewide legislation. But hey, having a mayor issue a proclamation, if you can get that, even just putting it up on your Facebook page, but even better, if you can get a press release out to news stations that it was done. Parental Alienation Day, man, April 25th. There's a lot of organizations that have done a great job. I know Danica Joan down in Florida does a great job. Wendy Perry in Texas. And I hate to mention names because I always leave people out. But there's a lot of people that do a great job getting publicity on Parental Alienation Day. Yeah, that's getting legislation passes. And the whole shared parenting issue isn't ever going to be solved by just legislation. There's a media component. There's a judicial accountability component. There's a parental alienation component. There's a legislative. My specialty is in the legislative, but that's not the only one, and that's not the only important one. It's just that's where I'm educated, so I talk about that. But we still need the other people doing the other key components to get the changes made that we're going to need long term. Now, for people to play their role is I don't need to become a parental alienation expert. I need to know enough about it to articulate it to legislators. But I'm much better off if somebody says, I'd like to dive more into parental alienation. Hey, I tell you what, I know a Wendy Perry down in Texas that you need to talk to. I know a Cheryl Mefford in Springfield, Missouri that you need to talk to. And then let that person talk about that specific part of the issue.
Yeah, that's
how we work a lot better as a team.
Oh, definitely. Now, do you have any, biggest opponents that are, I don't know, bothersome?
Yeah, our two biggest opposition is domestic violence groups and the Bar Association. Now, within domestic violence groups, from the outside looking in, you'd think they're all the same. They're not all the same. There's some very good, legitimate domestic violence groups out there. And those organizations I support. You would
Mhm.
never want true domestic violence to happen. Unfortunately, there has been a lot, and I mean, we're talking millions and millions and millions of dollars in federal grants for domestic violence. Well, if I'm an unethical person, if I can make it appear that there's even more domestic violence and I can form a 501c3 and get some of this grant money, I can do a pretty good, I can get myself a six-figure salary with a 501c3 organization. Unfortunately, we can't do that with a C4, but C3s, they go out there, get themselves a six-figure salary doing that, but they just have to keep making it sound like there's a bigger issue. Well, what way to do that? Find the biggest type of domestic violence issues are going to come up during custody battles. So
Mhm.
that's what they focused on, and they make it look like every custody issue is going to have domestic violence in it, which isn't. And so, like I say, that the key is the legitimate ones. There's some very good legitimate domestic violence groups that I fully support. Unfortunately, not as many of those. The bulk of domestic violence organizations have become so focused on the monetary grants that they're getting now, they're not really worried about change. And then our other big opposition is the the Bar Association. And, you have to picture it from their perspective too. I don't agree with it, but realize an attorney's responsibility is to their client. So take somebody who is was accused of murder and gets assigned to an attorney. Their attorney may know that they committed the murder, or they may think that they committed the murder, but if they're being paid by that client, their job is to get that person off the hook or on the lightest sentence possible. It's not really to to help them out getting declared, that they're guilty. Well, the same way, the client for the family law attorney is either the father or the mother. It's never the child. It's the father or the mother. And so if I'm an attorney, my responsibility is to that mother or to the father. And the easiest tool to use is the child. Now, they'll never admit that. Instead, they claim best interest of the child. There's no best interest of the child because the court-appointed guardian ad litem is not truly really working for the child. So what you get is two attorneys. And I'm amazed at how many times I get parents that call me up that tell me, Mark, I didn't hate the other parent as much until I walked into that first visit with my attorney. And the attorney usually says something to the effect of, look, in our state, you're not going to get 50-50. One of you is going to win and one of you is going to lose. So unless you want to be the one to lose, I need you to help me dig up dirt on why that person is a bad parent. And so here's a couple of the most vulnerable, emotional time in their relationship. They're closing a chapter and supposed to be moving on. And instead, that chapter gets reopened again. And we don't reopen the good things. The only thing we're looking for, encouraged by this attorney, is everything bad about this person. And just like anything in life, if you look for it, you're going to find it. And so they're digging dirt, and both attorneys are doing this to their clients to create this adversarial relationship. Why? Because if I'm an attorney, the more I can keep you fighting and the longer I can keep you fighting, the more billable hours I can rack up.
Mm-hmm.
Now, imagine how different that conversation would be if we had equal shared parenting laws across the country, and that same person walks into the attorney, and now the attorney says, look, in our state, you're both pretty much going to get 50-50 unless there's just some overwhelming reason why that person can't be a parent. So you may as well put that money in your own kid's college fund instead of my kid's college fund. I mean, imagine how different that would be across the country. And that way, too, the courts would be cleared for the cases that really need us. The challenge is that the court system is so bogged down by cases that shouldn't be in there. It should be a 50-50. We don't need you in our courtroom. Get the heck out of here. Learn how to get together, and get along. And now the cases that really need problems and really have problems can have the time in front of a judge that they need.
Mm-hmm. These judges will say, well, I have a high conflict case. But if they really looked into it, they actually have a high conflict personality disorder that they're dealing with.
Yeah, and that's another key too that I've, I'm not probably near the expert that you are in this, but with parental alienation and narcissistic type personalities, I had no idea what had been done to me, even though I had kind of been a part of it. Not putting down the other party, but she'd already been through it with two other. I'm the third father in this. And with the second father, I had innocently enough been a party to it, and not even realized it. Little things like she would ask me to make decisions about the kids for father number two. Now, I had never had kids before. It
Mhm.
seemed a little odd, but if somebody's highly manipulative, they can get you to where you would do things like that. Now that I have a child, I'm thinking, wait a minute, nobody should be making decisions about someone else's kids. What I should have done back then, and I feel horrible for this, is say, no, if you have a problem, either you decide or you call that father. I'm not the father. And
Mhm.
we were just dating at that point, and she was already moving me into that phase. And now looking back, I learned about things like gaslighting and projection and the love bombing. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is textbook what I went
Mhm.
through. Sadly, by the time I figured it out, it was 2 years too late.
Mhm.
And sadly, most judges aren't aware of that. And as you're aware, most judges and guardian ad litems side with the alienator instead of the real victim. They're totally put over.
Well, I also think they side with these people because, um, I hate to say this, but a lot of judges are personality disorders, so they relate very well to an attorney who is a personality disorder, him or herself, representing a personality disorder, so they all seem to click, and they understand and relate to each other. That's why they win.
And it could be that way. Yeah. I mean, like I say, it's the whole system. It is, if you sit through a day of family court, you're just shocked at what goes on. And I think most people would be shocked. That's why it's a shame that we can't have cameras in these family courtrooms showing the whole world what's going on.
You know, people would like cameras and tamper-proof mics in these courtrooms. And, how do you write that up to legislation?
Well, that is one thing that we really need is we've got to get that in there. Unfortunately, we're fighting an uphill battle because the bar association and the judges will come out full-fledged against something like that. And they'll always try to make it claim like they're trying to protect the children. And there's a degree of that I understand, but that's not the real motive. The real motive is they want to be able to do things without having it on record.
Mhm. Okay, so, it's so hard to get legislation passed. What are the 3 biggest reasons it's so hard to get any type of legislation passed?
I think several things going against us. One is, as I said, they're bombarded by so many issues. And unfortunately, our issue hasn't even been on their radar screen yet. So we're not even in the top 100 causes. There's, like I said, pro-life issues, highway funding issues, education issues. This year with COVID, there's health issues. We're not even in the top 100 for the overwhelming majority of legislators. We're not even a fleck on their screen yet at this point. So educating legislators, and then the fact that the few educators that have been or few legislators that have been educated, the overwhelming majority of them that I've met with, and like I said, I've personally met with over 580 legislators, and more than half of them have told me the only call they've ever gotten was from somebody yelling at them or threatening them. And they said the person just turned them off because they came across as someone who had anger management issues. I understand what the person was feeling, but they didn't understand how to relate. And
Mhm.
then you go into the fact, as I mentioned, with domestic violence groups and the Bar Association, these are two different industries that have spent hundreds of millions of dollars, not just on our issue, but on other issues and other pieces of legislation, and have dozens of years of lobbying experience. In the shared parenting community, aside from myself, I just don't know too many other people that have a 35-year background in the legislative arena.
Mhm.
Most people have never been to a Capitol until this happens to them. And their first exposure as a lobbyist, if you will, even though they're not like a professional lobbyist, but their first exposure lobbying for anything was lobbying for shared parenting the first day they ever went to the Capitol. And we're going up against a bar association that has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of professionally well-funded lobbyists, and the domestic violence organizations the same way. They have been trained on how to meet with legislators, what to say to legislators. I mean, they've got it down to an art and a science of how to articulate the pitch, pace, pause of your voice and fluctuation when you're meeting with the legislator. I mean, they have it down to a science. And we have people that are just yelling and screaming, and it's just, we're not even in the same league. I mean, not even being close to the same league. One point I made is, if you ever go to the Russell Building in Washington, D.C., that's the House building that has the majority of the senior level type members of the Senate. It's right across from the U.S. Capitol. Very different than if you go into the House side. Professional lobbying firms, now this may have changed within the last 2 years, but for about 60 years, lobbying firms in Washington, D.C. would never hire a lobbyist who had facial hair. Because it had just been, there had never, until Ted Cruz grew his facial hair a couple of years ago, it had been 40 years since anyone had ever been in the U.S. Senate with facial hair. And so in Washington, you could go to the Russell Building and it was a night and day difference. I would always bring people there every once in a while, and I would tell them, hey, do me a favor. Look around how many people are going to have facial hair in this building today. And they were like, that was the weirdest thing. I didn't see one person. You go out anywhere else in society, you'll see facial hair everywhere. But you go to the Russell Senate building, you'll have to look hard. Now, it may have changed, since Ted Cruz, but as of 3 years ago, you would never see a person with facial hair unless it was somebody visiting a member of Congress, of the Senate. But that's why science. I mean, if they are that strict that they wouldn't even hire somebody without facial hair, and they thought that was that important, they have it down to an art and a science. And for the most part, and so that's why I said my big passion is trying to educate people on how they can be the change. Because instead of having one person going to the Capitol making a bad impression, imagine if we had 10 or 15 people in every state that knew how to open the door to a legislator's office and how to conduct themselves and how to get past the gatekeeper, what to say, what not to say, how to articulate that message in a 3-minute elevator pitch. If we had 10 or 15 of those in every state across the country, it would be a done deal.
Mm-hmm. So people really don't have to have a political background to approach legislation, and it's just handling a phone call.
Yeah, and to be honest, from a legislator's perspective, a constituent in their district is so much more influential than a lobbyist outside the district. If there's I can be as articulate as I want, and I'm pretty well known in the state of Missouri, but I promise you this: if I call a legislator who's in a different part of the state of Missouri, and one of their constituents calls them and says, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Senator, I live in your district, and man, I've got this issue. I need to talk to you. If I'm that senator, I want to hear from them. And if they can articulate that message without sounding too professional, the less professional you sound, the more you can just sound like a real everyday constituent. That's powerful. So we need a few people like me that can give some of the facts, figures, and details for credibility standpoint. But if anybody watching this has never been to your state capitol, you are more powerful than me at this point. If you call your own state rep and your own state senator and say, listen, I've never called a representative before, but this issue really affects me. I'd like 5 minutes of your time. I can almost promise you're going to get 5 minutes of their time, because if they realize nothing has ever risen to the level to call a legislator, but this issue does, and you're their constituent, because being a constituent means a lot. If I'm a legislator, the last thing I want in the next re-election cycle is somebody to put a mailer, my opposition, saying, with a picture of a constituent that says, I tried calling my legislator and they wouldn't listen to my call. You don't ever want that. So they're not going to take that chance. So if you're a constituent, you're going to get a phone call returned. And if you want it, you're going to get either a meeting or a phone meeting, one of the two.
Yeah, people need to hear that they can at least, try and talk to these legislators. There's so much work that needs to be done.
Yeah, and like I said, their own state senator and state rep every time will answer the phone. Every single time they'll get through. Mm-hmm. And then normally that's when you do, and I've got a whole video series that I'm doing where I one of the things I talk about is playing the checkerboard. That once you have that first meeting, that's when you ask them, hey, who else should I talk to? And now the opening line of that next person is, hey, I just got done meeting with Representative Murphy, and he recommended that I call Representative Jones. And so now if I'm Representative Jones, I'm thinking, my colleague over there, Murphy, thinks I need to meet with this guy. Okay, I better take that call.
Mhm.
So you never just call up and say, I'd like to talk. You always, if you're an unknown in a state, always use that. Now, don't ever use a name if they didn't give you the name, because many times they will call and check.
Mhm.
So they'll
Mhm.
call, Jones will call Murphy and say, hey, did you really recommend this person? And if they're like no, I've never met with them before, that's going to work again. So don't make it up. But in almost every case, if you meet with your state rep or your state senator, they will give you a game plan. And they'll say, okay, you need to talk. This person's on the judicial committee. You probably need to talk to them. And so they'll give you somebody. And your opening line is never, hey, I'd like to talk to you. It's always, I just met with Representative Murphy, and he recommended I give you a call and meet with you.
Yeah, that's good. That's, you know, I mean, a lot of parents are wondering this. How do we get rid of Title for B, D, and E? This
That's
is.
that's the $24,000 question. We are working on that. I don't know that we're going to get a chance to with the current setup in Washington, D.C. And it's nothing against Republicans or Democrats, but by and large, more conservative people want to get rid of Title IV, B, D, and E because they don't like big government programs. Democrats tend to like that. And that's why you'll notice that the new Violence Against Women's Act and Caden Law and all the expansion of Title IV, B, and D always come through, normally Democrats. And so right now, we're just not going to get a lot of changes made. Now, I do think in November, I think there's going to be a big switch in Washington, D.C., and we'll have a chance to get some changes made. We did get a few things done with Trump. I know Connie Regularly, Kathleen Arthur, and like I said, I hate to mention names because I leave people out that did some work on this. But we did get, I think it was June 9th of 2 years ago, Trump signed the kinship part of the program. So we've had a few minor things, but nothing major yet at this point like we need. And I personally met, I am friends, people are probably gonna hold this against me, but I am friends with the Trump family. I'm actually hosting, Don Jr. is coming to St. Louis tomorrow night that I'm hosting here. But so I did get a few meetings at the White House before, and I got to meet the head of the entire Title 40 program in Washington, D.C. And he told me, he said, Mark, he said, I'm newly appointed by a president that most people in the bureaucracy hate. And he said, I'm dealing with hundreds and hundreds of people that work underneath me that have all worked together for the last 30 years. I'm the outsider. For me to even, he said, I can guarantee you there are dozens of people at high levels in the Department of HHS that their sole goal is to hide whatever they can from me so I won't even find out what's going on until I'm already out of office. And that's the challenge is this is the bureaucracy has become huge, which is a shame. Those people weren't elected. They were appointed to positions that they maintain after a president leaves, and they end up getting more power in Washington, D.C. than who was ever actually in office. And it really is a shame. But yeah, the whole thing, I do know we have several people. Andy Biggs is a big champion of that. And there's a lot of talk that should there be a Republican take over the House, that he's already the chair of the Freedom Caucus, which is, I'm pretty sure it's the largest caucus on the House side. So he's the chair of that. And there's talk that his name could come up as a potential speaker. I don't know if that's going to happen or not, but a lot of talk that he could become the majority floor leader in Washington, D.C. And I'll tell you what, when we have somebody like an Andy Biggs that wants to abolish Title 4D in the whole program, that's powerful if you get somebody like that as a floor leader. And I know there's other people. I've had talks with Rand Paul before. I've had talks with Ted Cruz. I mean, they're aware that these programs have some huge problems in them.
Yeah, it's this all started in 1997 when Clinton put this into motion. It's a shame that happened.
Yeah, well, that was the one expansion. It's grown steadily since 1973. just very gradually. They've added a tweak here and added, and that's the challenge with mission creep, is they always have some kind of a crisis that they need to make a change. But then once the crisis goes away, the change stays in place. And then it's another crisis and we need to add on, and it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and more bloated, to where now it's, I mean, you really do have to do away with the whole program. I mean, it's ridiculous how big it's gotten.
It's really, these programs are really human trafficking at its finest and extortion, in my opinion.
No, I agree. And especially at the federal level, I'm not a big fan of anything at the federal level. Education programs, the federal government can't figure out that, the exact same education that is needed in rural areas versus urban areas, or New York versus the middle of Kansas somewhere. People in Kansas need to decide what type of programs they need. And what has happened with the Title IV-D program and Title IV-E especially, is they have this one size fits all for the whole country. And then they throw this money out and states start chasing the money. And I remember I knew Phyllis Schlafly before she passed away. She was one of the biggest advocates, and the person that she spent 5 years mentoring before she died to take over the Eagle Council, Ed Martin's a good friend of mine. Ed and I talk about once a week. And Ed says the same thing. These programs have just gotten so big because anytime there's a major challenge and you have a hard time passing legislation, Ed always says, find the money. Because somewhere there's a money trail that nobody wants to give up. And Phyllis started talking about that in 1998. She started speaking on the dangers of Title IV-D and how it was going to create a fatherless society. And it's just sad. If you read her writings from 1998, everything she said was going to happen has happened, all because of the big changes that you talked about. 1997 was when the biggest change took place.
Yeah, it's disheartening. I've talked to so many mothers and fathers that are just they're basic slaves, to be honest. They're slaves to this Title IV-D or B. It's just, I personally would like to see the abolishment of CPS.
Oh, yeah, I agree. Yeah, and the stories that I've heard out of there, and that isn't as much my issue, but there's overflow within it. But the horror stories that I've seen as a result of the people that I've met, it's staggering. And once again, it comes down to the money. Is there's money involved into, basically, like you said, it's basically extortion and kidnapping, where a CPS worker can show up at someone's house and threaten to take their kids away. And here's some government agency that no one's been elected. There's no recourse for this person, that has just unlimited power. And the stories that I hear about of kids that have been adopted out and miss a chance to grow up with their biological parents. And so many times you hear stories where it's because they didn't have the financial resources. And that's a reason to take kids away from a parent. I mean, my gosh, what would they have done 100 years ago on the farm? They would have taken every kid away because they didn't have the resources. Why don't we figure out a way to get resources to that parents instead of taking the kids away because they don't have the financial resources?
And just because parents are poor doesn't give them the excuse to take their kids.
Yeah, I'm just shocked at some of these stories that I've heard.
Yeah, I don't know. I sometimes I just don't sleep well after talking to a parent that is suffering under the slavery of Title IV-D, and then on top of that, they force this mother or father to pay child support on a child they can't even see.
Yeah, that's what blows my mind is you rip the child out of a parent's life, and then to add more insult to it, you force them to pay for the child they can't even see. Give me my child, I'll pay every expense you need for them. But I want to see them. I mean, that is just absurd to me that something like that could happen. So I just got a message that our Senate bill just hit the Senate floor, or it got reported out. So that means it's on the formal calendar. And in Missouri, we filed two bills, one in the Senate and one in the House. They're identical bills. And that way we can move closer when it gets down the line. And literally just a few minutes ago, it just got reported to the Senate floor. So sometime in the next week or so, we should have a floor vote in the Senate in Missouri. And ironically, our House bill will probably have a floor vote on the House too in the same week. So
that's excellent.
So we're making progress here.
Well, that's good. What do you think of these false accusations through CPS or whatever? I feel if people are going to make false accusations, they should give their name. I think that would stop a lot of the lying.
Yeah, I think the sad thing is it's one of those things too, that until it's happened to you, before it happened to me, if I had ever heard of someone, my attitude would be wherever there's smoke, there's fire, there's an allegation. And then I went through a situation myself. I mean, not to brag, but I've like the most beaver claver dork dweeb you've ever met in your life.
Oh.
I've literally never smoked a cigarette. No exaggeration. I have never even tasted a beer. That's not an exaggeration. I have never tasted a beer. Never done drugs. I was a Eagle Scout, Boy Scout. I mean, I am a dork. And a CPS worker shows up at my door because there had been allegations made. And fortunately, Levi was only 6 years old at the time. But thank God Levi was able to articulate what had happened. And I don't want to go through all the details on a public setting, but the events had basically been orchestrated and Levi overheard them being orchestrated. And the CPS worker told me, he said, normally when we interview kids, we're afraid that somebody coached them what to say. But he's like, your son just went and laid everything out black and white. And he's like, okay, this was obviously orchestrated. I'm not even opening a case on this. And so, first I'm relieved because I was just in shock. Like, what the heck is going on? I knew nothing happened. But so then I asked him, like, I said, so what's going to happen to her then? Will she go to jail? And he's like, no, in family law cases, there's no repercussion. And he said, because we're afraid that would discourage people from coming forth if there really was a problem. And then the CPS worker also told me that he said, normally when he goes to interview people, in almost 9 out of 10 cases, if they're in the middle of a custody battle, 9 out of 10 he believes are going to be false. And the two things are sad about that. One is, what about the one case that isn't true, that really needed the time to be investigated? But there were so many false allegations that people were like, eh. And then you find out, oops, that was the one that slid through the cracks. But yeah, with no repercussions there. And so sadly, mine already knew, because she'd already been through it with 2 other fathers, that they wouldn't take her seriously. And my son was able to articulate, but if they go to someone who's a publicly mandated reporter, like a teacher, then the teachers, and so they'll talk to the teachers to get the teacher to report it. And then the very sad thing about that is, my reputation for a while, when I walked into that school, I didn't know who knew and who didn't. My son had told me that his mom had talked to everybody in the school that would listen. And I'm telling you, I can still remember about a week and a half later, I walked into that school and it was like everybody's head is looking the other way to the wall, looking down. Nobody even wanted to acknowledge me. And then after everything is cleared, you can't go around the school saying, hey, by the way, in case you heard, it was a false allegation. So I think there still may not, I think a lot of people figured out what was going on very quickly. Because I was amazed there were a lot of great parents that reached out to immediately to make sure that I felt comfortable going to events and everything, and teachers and everything like that really started reaching out after a couple of weeks. But there was about 2 weeks where I really felt like that whole school knew of an accusation that I didn't even know what they'd been told. And then even after that, a call was made to my, now this is what's really sad is, all parties had been notified that the case wasn't even going to be opened because it was so blatantly false. A month later, my pastor, now I've been teaching Sunday school since I only got Levi on weekends. I didn't want his last memory of me to be, I'm in church somewhere and he's in class with kids, and then I immediately take him to his mom's. So I went to my church and said, I've always worked with kids. Can I teach Sunday school for his class? And so they let me move up every year.
Mhm.
And at the time he was in first grade. I'd been teaching at that point for 4 years every Sunday. And a call's made to my pastor saying, do you realize there was and they did it in such a way where they couldn't get in trouble. Do you realize there was a allegation made and a report filed with CPS? Now, once again, it was almost like God made it so. I wish I could have been there. My pastor has no idea what's going on. But ironically, his mother had been a social worker. And I mean, without even needing to have advance warning, his radar went up right away. And he said, well, wait a minute. You said an allegation had been filed. What's the case number? Ma'am, let me just tell you this. You know for a fact that case was closed and there was no merit to it. And the verbiage you used with me was an allegation had been filed. You know that case isn't going to go through. And you just tried to tarnish this man's reputation in our church. You tried to get him kicked out of being around children in our church and ruining his life. Ma'am, you need to go to church. Oh, what I would have done if I could have been there.
A fly on the wall.
But sadly, if I didn't have a good pastor that knew that, you realize I could have been ostracized from my church, which, as you know, that's part of parental alienation. The two biggest parts of a child's life are the church they go to and the school they go to. You can get dad out of both of those, man, dad's out of the picture now. And that's what was the goal, was trying to happen there.
Oh. Well, I just think if you're gonna call in one false accusation after another, you should be named. I mean, it's one thing if I don't know, if you think Johnny is being beaten down the street, 2 doors down, then call the police.
Yeah, I'm shocked because I said from a due process standpoint in this country, you have a right to face your accusers and to know who your accuser is. How do you disprove a negative when you don't even know what's been said?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, just shocking it. And then more importantly, there's got to be consequences. If you knowingly file a false allegation, you should have to serve the time that person was going to serve.
I agree.
Instead of just waltzing around like nothing's happened.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. And this goes on because I had one indication and I had to go to a CPS court, and that was a $1,500 day. And then I was exonerated, and I called the hospital. I was an ER nurse. I said, I can come back to work. Well, little did I know, 4 days later, another indication came down for emotional child abuse. So, I mean, this stuff, we need to know who's calling these in.
Yeah.
I mean, during the second CPS hearing, the caseworker admitted who it was, and it was just gold.
Oh,
But
wow.
but
Well, see, that's the sad thing. Mine was done by one of the teachers, but to this day I don't know which teacher it was.
Yeah, I just don't know what to think of this. I'm just aghast
Yeah.
at how people treat each other and how how brutal people are towards each other.
Yeah, but it is amazing because, like I said, before it happened to me, if there was an allegation made, I always agreed, or assumed the person making the allegation was the right one. Now, anytime I hear an allegation, my attitude is, I want to hear what the other party has to say first. I
agree.
never believe. My attitude is, how do we know we're not being, lied to by somebody who's an aggressor?
Right. And these people have to be held accountable. These people should be forced to pay attorney fees and clean up the mess.
Yeah. Oh, definitely.
So, but, as far, like with your Americans for Equal Shared Parenting, some parents will say, well, yeah, we started out equal and then, someone started interfering in our relationship. Then we ended up in court. And then the kids were taken away for whatever lie or silver bullet that was shot out. And then it's just not equal anymore. What does someone do? Do they contact the legislator and tell them a brief synopsis of what happened?
Yeah, I mean, that's the key, is educating legislators on all the things that can happen. Most legislators are not aware of how common we call the silver bullet, the false allegations are.
Mhm.
And then, with parental alienation, most people are not aware of how parental alienation, that even if you have 50-50, somebody who's a very skilled manipulator can be very, very good. And unfortunately, I've been doing a lot of reading, and I've started to make a list. I'm up to over 300 specific incidences that were all things that by themselves don't seem like a big deal. But
Mhm.
you start adding them up one by one, and they may be little things. First, they put down little things of, they don't like the way the other parent feeds you.
Mhm.
And then they start putting into question that. I had talked to Levi the other day. I used to always go to the Waffle House, and I told Levi, I said, it's a guy thing. We like to go to Greasy Spoons. And the next weekend he comes over, he says, Mom said that's a really, really unhealthy place to go. There have been Waffle Houses that have been shut down for ants, for roaches in their kitchen. And I'm like, so little things like that to make the child question the other parent.
Mhm.
And by themselves, it doesn't seem like a lot until you realize there's 300 incidences like that,
Mhm.
to where the child starts questioning. And fortunately, I've learned enough to know I still will never get the one time. This has been, I think he was in third or fourth grade. He was tardy 42 times. 42 times he was tardy in one year. And on one very, very rare occasion, I got a chance to drive him to school. And we get there early, and so we're waiting for the school to open. And out of the blue, he makes some comment. He's like, Mom says I could never live with you because I'd be late for school every day. And I like, talk
Mm.
about classic projection. And I
Yeah.
so wanted to jump on, but instead I've learned to just stay calm and just ask him a question to get him thinking himself. So I said, well, I don't know. What do you think about that, Levi? And he's like, well, I don't know. Every time Mom goes somewhere, she's always late. And every time you go somewhere like today, we're always early. And
Mhm.
so that's the key, is I don't just want to give him the answer. I want to get him thinking for himself so he can identify projection patterns himself when they come about. But I'm telling you, in 12 years, every week there's a new one that comes up. Every
Mhm.
single week, it never goes away. And
I
he's 12 now. I'm like, I'll be doing this until he's 18, well, even beyond 18. But
Mhm.
you can never let your guard down and think, whoo, finally, I can be
Mhm.
a regular parent. No, there are attempts every single week to carve me out of his life.
It's horrible. I totally understand that. Even after mine had aged out, there was an incident where my son totaled his car. So get ready for that. I'm saying
Oh,
they all
yes.
do it. But the state police became involved, and my other son, the older one, because these kids were taken away from me when they were 14, 15, based on a lie. All right, so he went up to the police officer and said, "F off."
My
And,
gosh.
so then he told him to stand down, go stand over there. So then he comes up to him again 10 minutes later and tells the cop to go F yourself.
Wow.
So my other son was telling me this, and I'm thinking, "Oh my gosh." I mean, they have no respect for authority. And so what I did was I called the state police barracks, and I told them who I was. And I said, "I'm very sorry. I don't know who this officer was, but I totally apologize for my son's behavior because, I would not have raised him that way." And, he said, "Oh, this is nice of you to call. I will tell him. I know exactly the case, the cop. I'll tell him," because and I eventually told my older son that I did call the state police and apologized for your behavior, you know,
Yeah.
but
Well, that's the real sad thing, is from a discipline standpoint, the non-custodial parent has to be very careful. I can't spank Levi
Mhm,
because, man, that would be reported in a heartbeat.
mhm,
And yet I know for a fact she spanked her other kids, and
mhm,
and she was in agreement that there's times where done properly, you do stuff like that. And but with any kind of discipline, because if I only get them on weekends and I discipline too much, it's very easy to plant the seed of, I guess you probably don't want to go to your dad's because you'll probably get in trouble again next weekend. And then all of a sudden the kid never wants to go, and then they make the famous comment, well, he just doesn't want to go to his dad's.
mhm,
No, he didn't want to go to his dad's because his dad disciplined for something he did wrong. And rather than edify and support, the co-parent instead used that against the other parent
Mhm.
and used that as an alienation opportunity. And that happens so many times. And I know my son. When I look at the way my father raised me, I can't even come close to doing that with my son, even though it needs to be done.
Mhm.
Because there's no doubt in my mind, if he's feeling bad when he goes back from the weekend, immediately, gosh, I bet you probably don't want to go back next week then. I can
Oh.
guarantee you that would come out of her mouth.
Mhm. I guess I was lucky because when I mean, I got them every other weekend, but the judge wrote orders that I was not to have any contact during holidays, Mother's Day, whatever holiday, and no contact via iPhone, landline, whatever. It was crazy. But luckily, when I had them every other weekend, they were fighting over the lawnmower, who wanted to mow. I mean, I just stayed out of it. I mean, they were very well behaved with me. So I was grateful for that, you
Yeah,
know.
I'm pretty fortunate. He's a great kid, and
Mhm,
he really has done just a great job. But it's just a shame because there are times when I would definitely like to discipline more, but
mhm, mhm,
you really can't do it.
mhm. I understand that. Because I felt like I walked on eggshells when I had them because it's like I don't wanna, tick anyone off.
Yeah.
Hmm. So, what advice do you have for parents, talking to legislators about parental alienation? Because I think a lot of them just wanna turn a blind eye.
Yeah, and that the concept of parental alienation is very hard to get through to a legislator because, like I said, unless they've either personally gone through it or someone they know has gone through it, it's a concept that is just so hard to understand because from their standpoint, it just seems like two parents bickering.
Mhm,
And most parental alienation, there's no one incident that's the magic bullet. It was a series of small things. And so you sound like you're nitpicking if you
mhm,
just come up with the small things. And it's just so very, very hard to articulate. That's why the first thing I've been going for is the equal shared parenting bill, the 50-50, because it's a lot easier for legislators to grasp that. Then
mhm,
behind that, then is when we're going to have to start educating them on parental alienation. But they're going to need to hear from a lot of parents for that to be able to resonate because one or two parents coming to a letter, but I still encourage them to call. So at least it gets it on the radar screen.
mhm,
I don't know if I believe them or not, but at least I've heard of it. And then if they get a second one, oh, that's right. That's that same issue. I had that last person call. And you know
mhm,
what? This person's saying almost the same thing.
mhm,
And then, once they hear multiple people, then they start realizing, okay, the first person was probably crazy, but maybe two of them are crazy. But now I've got three. Hard to believe all three of these were crazy.
mhm,
So what they need is more people because that gives credibility back to the first one again.
mhm. Oh, definitely, and this is also a global issue. I mean, oh, it's a mess.
Yeah.
Hey, is there anything you'd like to add? And how can parents reach you?
Yeah, like I say, my passion is I want to try and educate people so you can be the change.
Mhm,
And to partner with, there's a lot of great organizations in the shared parenting community. And I think just like anything else, when you start something and you put, you invest your time, your money, your energy into it, you're proud of what you've accomplished. And in the shared parenting community, we have about 1,200 organizations that are out there, very, very good ones, and very deservedly, able to be proud of what they've accomplished. And I think so many times people think that we're all in competition, and we're really not. And I want to make sure people understand by promoting my group, that doesn't say I'm better than any other group. This is just what I do. I still believe fervently there's groups like the NPO, National Parents Organization, great organization, does phenomenal research, does their shared parenting report card, things that I don't have a desire to do, but they need to be done. And rather than me recreate the wheel, why don't I edify them and say, man, they've already done this.
mhm,
Hey, let's the whole community use that report card and get it out there. My niche, though, is because I've got a 35-year background, and not to brag, but I really do kind of know what I'm talking about. It's
mhm,
something you can't pick up by going to the Capitol even 10 times a year. If you're part-time, you can't get 35 years of knowledge doing that.
Mhm.
So my goal is to educate people. So I do a series of Facebook Lives, and now I'm really starting to get into it to try and put a series on a YouTube channel where it'll have topic by topic. So I'm just starting a series now called How to Do a Legislative Hearing. And in there is going to be about 20 to 25 5-minute clips on laying the table for a Senate hearing. How do you know what to expect? How do you give your testimony? How do you plan and orchestrate it to where 5 people give 5 different testimonies that all relate to each other? And so I'm going to do a whole series on that. And that way people can be educated without having to give me a phone call, because I just don't have time to call, talk on the phone all day. But that way too, we can get teams educated. So if we get 10 people in one state, they all know when a Senate hearing's coming up, hey, watch that series, step by step what to do at a Senate hearing. And, if you have a team that wants to go lobbying at a Capitol, I'm going to have a whole series on that. What do you say? What do you not say? How do you give a 3 minutes, pitch to a legislator? All those type of topics. So if they go to my, I'm not the most technical guy in the world. So we don't have as much on a website. We don't have as much on our YouTube channel yet. I do plan on getting there. In the short term, most of it is on our Facebook page, because I do know how to click Facebook Live and start and finish. So that's about all I am on that part. But the easiest way is to go to the Americans for Equal Shared Parenting Facebook page. And then if people can donate, we greatly appreciate it. We don't have much funding. Literally, the majority of our funding in the past 12 months has come from my Uber driving. And my Uber driving, in case you could tell, I'm at my condo, and I don't have a lot of friends over here. When you live in a $68,000 condo in St. Louis, that ain't the that's far below the standard of living in St. Louis. So there just isn't enough money with my Uber driving but I do think it would be helpful for me to be able to go to more states and help people. Not that they necessarily need me, but sometimes instead of just giving the theory in the videos, to have me there for a day, and I can take a couple people. And then after each meeting, we can meet in the hallway and say, hey, remember when you did this? Try doing this differently next time. And instead of theory, I can more coach and mentor them. And like I said, it's not about me. It's about making them better so that they can be out there. But just like a professional baseball player, yeah, you can watch videos, but eventually you need to go to batting practice and have a batting coach analyze you and what you're doing. Mm-hmm. So if we had more funds, I could go to more states to help more people out. We just don't have the funds now. So if people can donate, we're a C4 though, so they don't get a tax deduction for donating to us, because what we do is considered political activity. It's equivalent of donating to a political candidate. But I promise you're making a difference with that money, and I promise you that money's being very efficiently used too.
Excellent, excellent. Well, I'm so glad you came on my show. I have been trying to get you on here for like the last year.
I know, and I apologize. I've had some health issues up and down, and I apologize very sincerely.
No, you're fine.
A great 2.5 weeks, though, a very good 2.5 weeks, which is very rare to have that long of a stretch. So I'm hoping to squeeze in more interviews, but I appreciate your persistence and appreciate everything you've done for the community. As I said, no one person is better. We each have a niche, and we need to all work together in the same community. And you've just done a great job for all of us too. So I appreciate what you do.
Oh, thank you so much. Hey, don't jump off. Slam the Gavel is a podcast to help the public understand what really goes on in these family courtrooms. I'm your host, Marianne Petrie, author of Dismantling Family Court Corruption, Why Taking the Kids Was Not Enough, and Cry Out for Justice, Poems of Truth. Please join us again with Mark Ludwig. I will have him on in the future and other exciting guests. Thank you again, Mark.
All right. Thanks again. I appreciate it.